sorry, we had too many characters in the title that was going to go to YouTube. So we've sorted that. Okay. If anyone is watching this and isn't a member of their local estuary forum, but would like to be, please do let me know at some point and I'll add you to the forum's mailing lists. This evening's sequence of 3 talks, the Yealm, Remedies and Seagrass Meadows, What is the Connection, does exactly what it says on the tin. I would very much like to welcome our first speaker this evening, Fiona Crouch of Natural England, who will give us an introduction to the Life Recreation Remedies project, the partnership, the aims, and what is hoped to be achieved within the Yealm and Plymouth Sound estuaries, marine protected areas. I'm asking Fiona to introduce herself. Fiona, thank you very much, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. I'll just do the share screen Jeopardy. I hope you can all see that. So yeah, thanks very much. Thank you, Nigel, for inviting me to talk to you this evening, and also for the support of the South Devon AONB Estuaries Partnership. As Nigel says, my name is Fiona Crouch. I work at Natural England and I'm the Remedies Project Manager. And I'd just like to spend about the next 20 minutes or so just giving you an introduction to the Life Recreation Remedies, what we are hoping to achieve with this project. It is an acronym, it's a bit of a mouthful, but it stands for Reducing and Mitigating Erosion and Disturbance Impacts Affecting the Seabed. Right, here we go. Ooh. So I've got a bit stuck. Okay, so how did the project begin? Well, it really evolved out of conversations had with the Royal Yachting Association around recreational impacts, seagrass, and probably many of you will be familiar around a conversation about Sutherland about 10 years ago. There is obviously concern about recreational impacts, but also evidence and how we can find solutions. And so there are a couple of eco-mooring workshops. That term eco-mooring evolved into environmentally friendly moorings and then has now evolved into advanced mooring systems. And those were organised by National Trust and the Royal Yachting Association. So through those, discussing what happened and people's concerns, as I said, and obviously there was quite a lot to do, and so that required some funding. So we looked at the EU LIFE programme, and then a further workshop in February 2018 brought together potential partners, again discussing through the issues and what we needed to focus on. And just to say the focus was on recreational impacts, mainly because we understand that there are many other impacts on our sensitive habitats and seagrass beds, such as water quality, but there was other work going on looking at those particular issues and impacts. So we really wanted to focus on recreation. And so just going through some of those key issues, well, as I say, recreational pressures are increasing. Over the years, more people want to engage with the ocean. There's a big initiative around health benefits and well-being, and that's understandable. People want to get out there and enjoy it, as I do. And that's from people sort of buying stand-up paddle boards to those that want to buy a nice boat. But as those numbers of people increase and those pressures increase, and we need a thriving, healthy ocean for all. And what's the point if people want to go out there and enjoy it, but then we're having a detrimental impact? After all, our ocean produces over 50% of our oxygen. And some of the habitats we're focusing on, such as seagrass and merle, they're easily damaged by disturbance such as abrasion and scouring. And then understandably, these habitats are under the waves. Unless you're lucky enough like myself, you can go diving. It's hard to really see these sensitive features, know their locations and also their importance. So large areas of seabed within special areas of conservation are currently in an unfavourable status. So what does that mean? Well, special areas of conservation were designated under the European directive. and it's part of our government's responsibility to keep those habitats in a favourable status. And unfortunately, those habitats seem to be now in unfavourable status. And you may be saying, oh, well, now Brexit, we're out of the European Union, so what happens to those designations? Well, all that law is now being passed through the Environment Bill, which soon be enacted, so that protection will still go forward. And also, for example, seagrass, there's been significant long-term loss of extent and quality over the years. One particular is in the 1930s with the wasting disease, but I won't go on too much about that because Mark's going to talk about seagrass. And then the other sensitive habitat is merle. It's very slow growing and it's very fragile. And if it gets damaged, then it would either take a long time to recover or maybe not recover at all. So these are the kind of issues we're looking at when we're addressing recreation. So once we got the funding, we started the project. So it's a 4-year project, started in July 2019, due for completion in October 2023. And the overall premise of the project is to improve the condition of 4 marine habitats of European importance. So these are the Annex 1 habitats that SACs are designated for. So they're sandbanks slightly covered by seawater all the time. Some of these are quite precise, mudflats and sandflats covered by seawater at low tide, and then a bit more broad, larger inlets and bays and estuaries. And 2 of the sub-features we really want to focus on are the seagrass and merle. So our partners, so Natural England are the lead partner. We have the Royal Yachting Association with the Green Blue Initiative, and that's fantastic. They've been there from the start, building up the project, and they give us that link to the recreational boating community. We've got the Marine Conservation Society. They've been working and conserving our seas for many years, which is fantastic. Their role in the project is around raising awareness through the education, and also the Sea Search programme with volunteer divers are helping us with our monitoring. We have the Ocean Conservation Trust, and they have a long-standing interest in seagrass and also conservation in the UK and globally. And they'll be leading our seagrass restoration work. And then finally, as I'm sure we're all aware, the Plymouth City Council and Taming Our Estuaries Consultative Forum, and they have an overarching management of the Plymouth Sound and Estuaries SAC. So it's great to have them on board as well. And as I say, we got the funding from the EU Life. So they provide 60% of a £2.5 million project. And the remaining 40% of that funding is met by the partners on the particular area of work they're focusing on. So our area is not just here in Plymouth. We are focusing on 5 SACs within Southern England. So Ardsey Complex, Fallon-Helford, Plymouth, Solent Maritime and Essex Estuaries. And those areas were really chosen because we have the most evidence that those sensitive habitats, which I'm referring to, are in unfavourable status. And just maybe to bring that back down a bit to Plymouth, just focusing on those Annex 1 habitats, these are some crazy maps. You can look at these on a programme called Magic Maps. It's open source, it's available to everyone. You probably need a few hours just to sort of delve into it. But this just shows those Annex 1 habitats highlighted on the left for the whole of the SAC, and then really homing in on the Yealm estuary. Now, these are really broad brush markings of the Annex 1 habitats, marking through what we say polygons. As I say, if you want to go into Magic, you can interrogate them further and get that point data if you wish. And I should say that this data on Magic is all that we have that is publicly available. So there is plenty other information out there which may not be in the public domain. So just tell you a bit more about our objectives and scope. So broadly, we put them into 3 objectives. So the first is to protect and reduce recreational pressures in England. around those 5 SACs. Key actions are sort of targeting through the RYA, is doing training of boaters and also charter boat skippers and people enjoying the ocean, and also understanding stakeholder behaviours, so those recreational behaviours within those SACs. The second one is to demonstrate large-scale restoration and also management techniques. So this is where we're looking at trialling advanced mooring systems, developing voluntary codes of conduct, managing some access, and then around that is the seagrass restoration. And then finally, there's no point in doing all this work if people don't know what we're doing. So we have a big programme of raising awareness and inspiring that better care by recreational users. So working with stakeholders and sharing our lessons learned and our activities with other people so that they can be used throughout the UK. We have the funding from Europe, so we also will be passing that and networking with European colleagues. So just to go into those objectives in a bit more detail, so reducing those recreational pressures. So we're doing some baseline monitoring of habitats. So we want to do those at the start and the finish of the project. And that's so we can actually monitor and see if there's been any change in the condition of those habitats through our interventions, or maybe not. Unfortunately, COVID has had a bit of an impact on being able to deliver those because we were all sort of stuck at home for the majority of last year. But we did manage to do some excellent surveys around the Solent with drop-down video and echo sounder, and we're doing some more work in the Fowl and Helford this year. As I said, that training with the RYA, I'll do that with their instructor programme and with sailing clubs. And they recently produced that green guide on anchoring and mooring. And it can be downloaded from their website. And we understand that people, they want to enjoy these areas. And if you are anchoring within these sheltered bays, which seagrass also likes to hang out in, and then this guide will help you do that in the most environmentally way you can. And so reducing those impacts. So we're doing recreational activity surveys, and these are across the 5 SACs. Liz will tell you a bit more about what was done around the Yealm, also in Corsands, and we've done some recreational boat surveys in the Fowl, and we'll be doing 3 other SACs this year. And that's just really to get an appreciation of the boats and what's going on in those areas. And we really understand that we had to do them last year, COVID year, and it absolutely wasn't a typical year, because once everyone got out of lockdown, we all went poof, went a bit bananas. Assess boaters' behaviours. So there's been a big piece of work done by our contractor Collingwood, and that's trying to engage with the boater community, sort of understanding their behaviours, where they go, their sort of knowledge of seagrass, of sensitive habitats. We had a webinar recently, which some of you may have attended, and there's a final report of all that work being put together at the moment. We also have planned for stakeholder workshops. Again, we really wanted to get out there and engage with stakeholders and local communities last year, but unfortunately due to COVID that didn't happen. We really didn't want to go down the virtual route because I think it's really important that we get out there and talk to people, and it just hasn't happened last year, but hopefully if all goes to plans and restrictions get lifted, then we will be out and about this summer. And there's a lot of monitoring and evaluation. So we are monitoring all the work we do, and that's really important. Again, to reporting to our funders, and then also sharing our work with others across the UK and Europe. So objective 2, well, this is really around that large-scale restoration and management. So we want to look at trialling these advanced mooring systems. These are systems that are used that reduce, or they take away that impact that traditional moorings have on scouring seagrass. As you can see in that diagram there, they're lifting off that riser chain or whatever that's off the seabed, so it reduces that impact. So we want to trial those in 2 of our SACs to start with, which is Plymouth Sound and Solent, and then look to what we can do in other areas. So managing access, we are doing a lot of work with other recreational activities such as bait digging and also trampling and people accessing intertidal areas and potentially having an impact on those. This has really been focused in Essex and the Solent at this time. A lot of those discussions through the surveys and the behaviour change work, what people were saying is, you know, where are these sensitive habitats? You ask us to try and avoid them, but we don't know where they are. Absolutely. We're going to be producing some charts. This is with the RYA to show people where those sensitive habitats are. There are some broad maps online at the moment. If you go to where the anchoring and mooring guide is, there's also maps there, but we want to make those better and help and put those, have more places where people can access those, so you know the locations. Develop voluntary codes of conduct, and that's all be through stakeholders, and that's really looking at those intertidal areas in Essex and Solent. And then there is looking at how we can restore seagrass on a larger scale, and we want to do that in Plymouth Estuaries and the Solent. We have a commitment to look at restoring 4 hectares of seagrass in Plymouth and 4 hectares in the Solent. And you can see in that image on the left, that's one of the divers from Ocean Conservation Trust carefully collecting those seeds. And finally, objective 3. So this is very much around our awareness raising. So we have a schools programme. The Ocean Conservation Trust have a dedicated education officer working on remedies. Have been doing a brilliant job, especially under the circumstances that, you know, due to that virus, that we haven't managed to do things how we would like to. So a lot of things have been going online as we are talking today. And as well as the Marine Conservation Society, as you'll see there, they had a series of webinars called Ocean Superheroes. And these can all be also accessible online. Also producing sort of infographics to help people with understanding what's going on. We have a dedicated seagrass lab at the National Marine Aquarium, which serves 2 purposes. There, the restoration work is going ahead. They have the tanks that you can see there in the photograph, where they're growing on the seedlings and working with the seagrass seeds. And then around that area, there's lots of information about seagrass. So that has a dual purpose for the project. So also raising awareness of events. Again, we had plans to go to lots of events last year to talk about the project, what we want to do and engage with people. And hopefully that will happen this year, along with conferences and workshops, webinars. Everyone's doing a cracking job doing things online, but I think it's not really the same as actually meeting people face to face. Although I'm sure a lot of things are going to carry on being online in the future. And we're also developing a project website. It's not online yet. We have one on .gov.uk, but we really want to have something that is a bit more engaging, and that would be seabed.co.uk, where all the work that we're doing and all the information that we'll be producing will be available on that website. And then finally, I just have that afterlife plan there. So one of the conditions of the EU Life funding is that the work doesn't stop when the funding stops. There's so many initiatives that, you know, you get your money for 3 years and then it's really hard to keep things going. So we have to develop this plan that how our initiatives will go forward for the next 5 years. So that would be one of my tasks, to talk to lots of people engaged, and how we can go forward after 2023. And that might be so much as carrying on our monitoring of the restoration areas, or how our interventions have helped with raising awareness over time. Because as we know, things don't just change overnight. So we need to look at that beyond the end of the project. So that's just a little flavour about what we're doing. It's a broad project. The focus is on all recreational activities, raising awareness, and how we can work with stakeholders and those people who want to enjoy our beautiful seas, and so we can help reduce the impacts of what we will have on those environments. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and thank you again for South Devon AMB Partnership for inviting me to talk to you today.
Thank you, Fiona. That was great. I don't have any questions on the meeting chat at the moment, but if anybody would like to put their hand up and ask a question.
Put my hand up, Nigel. Can you see it?
I didn't, to be honest, no. But carry on, Keith.
Okay. Fiona, one thing that's always worried me about seagrass condition assessments is that it's very much, never mind the quality, feel the width. It seems to be all about extent. Now, is any of the work that you're doing or that you know is being done actually about the associated species, the biodiversity that occurs within the seagrass?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, Keith, and the work we will be doing, and that's really where Sea Search comes in, and volunteers, divers, is really looking at more in depth about the habitats and the species that we want to gauge that information from. A lot of the assessments are, yes, they are sort of very much on a survey line that Natural England have, that's the process they use, but we hope to develop more information over time. Unfortunately, sort of diving, as we know, was pretty much curtailed last year, but we've got a series of programs working with Charlotte Bolton and the Sea Search so that we can get more of that data and more of that information.
Can I just say there are target species to look out for in the seagrass beds, which might be indicators of quality, and presumably Sea Search briefs will look for those things like feather duster worms and other burrowing species which show themselves at the surface. Yeah,
absolutely. And hopefully, Keith, you'd like to join us and you can help.
I have an intention to go back to Corsan Bay, which I did find to be a rich looking seagrass bed in a brief dive last September.
Brilliant. I'll see you out in the water. Hopefully, if we get out on the water.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? Oh, Jules Flory, if you'd like to ask your question, please.
Hello. So nice to be here. Thank you for that informative and interesting talk. I am genuinely excited about your project, and it's quite weird not coming to the meeting and seeing you all. And I want to say before I get to my question, sorry I was late. But Fiona, genuinely really excited about the outcomes, and thank you for coming tonight and telling us about what you're planning to do. I work as a biodiversity delivery manager for South West Water, and these have been strange times. And I just wanted to reach out tonight and engage with what you're doing, because when I first heard about it a couple of years ago, I was terribly excited on a personal level. You're investigating something that feels really important to me as a kid that was brought up on boats, that wants to learn how to impact and develop and do things in a way that makes our estuaries healthier. So it's a bit personal, but I just wanted to say thank you for what you're doing, and I'm a fan, so if I can help and get on my canoe and pull a video around, I'd be really up for it.
Thank you, George. Yeah, and it has been a challenging time, and so we had every intention of getting out there and engaging with people far more than we've been able to do, trapped, stuck at home. But yeah, please do get in touch. My email
I will
address
do.
on the slide, and yeah, we welcome any help and support. And yeah,
Thank you, Fiona.
Fiona, can you put your email address on the meeting chat?
Oh yeah, I'll work out how to do that. All right, I'm going to go for it.
Okay.
I found it.
Any other questions?
The camera.
Okay. In that case, our second speaker is Mark Parry of the Ocean Conservation Trust. Mark's talk is entitled Seagrass, Why is the World So Interested in It? Again, Mark will introduce himself, and thank you, Mark. And again, over to you.
Thank you, Nigel. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me along. Fiona's done a sterling job at keeping everybody interested.
I can't hear you, Mark.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
I can now. I can now.
Okay. Thanks for having me along this evening. Fiona did an amazing job at keeping all participants in the room and didn't drop any. So hopefully I can do something similar. So I do have a presentation to share with you. Yeah, it's not coming up. So let me just try and navigate to our screen. Click on the start. You think you can. Oh. Okay, so my name's Mark Parry. I work for the Ocean Conservation Trust, and I have done for the last 7 years with a focus on looking at seagrasses. And I know many of you through the course of that 7 years. And yes, what I want to talk about this evening is seagrass meadows. What's all the fuss about? So seagrasses seem to be gaining increasing attention, and they cover, or they offer, multiple ecosystem services, and there's one that I want to focus upon this evening. And when I started with the Ocean Conservation Trust 7 years ago, the conversation was very much about endangered species and habitat for endangered species. But now, 7 years on, it's every week I have a conversation about carbon and blue carbon. And I think that's why there are so many discussions taking place around seagrasses. So I'm going to try and, I've got everybody in the way. So there is, we're all aware that climate is changing and there is a climate emergency. And this role of blue carbon seems to be increasingly discussed. And how do we mitigate against that? Some of the discussions and some of the suggestions put forward is that we live a more sustainable life. We reduce our emissions and we adopt alternative technologies. Now, that takes in consideration the atmospheric CO2, or the reduction of atmospheric CO2. And if we got to the stage where we weren't emitting any more CO2, what do we think about, or how do we try and deal with the excess carbon that's in the atmosphere? So you can see on the right hand side there's a global temperature change over the course of what's our year, from 1850 to 2020, and the Paris Agreement says that every country signed up to it will limit their carbon emissions to cease global temperature change to between 1.5 and 2%. So one of the things that we don't often hear about in the media, and how we change or mitigate our climate change or our climate emergency, is how we sequester this atmospheric carbon. So there are carbon sequestration techniques of carbon capture, and also biosequestration. So plants, they absorb carbon dioxide, CO2, they keep hold of the carbon, and they emit the O2. So opposite to mammals or breathing animals. And biosequestration is a reasonably big deal. And the Keeling curve is a graph that shows carbon dioxide within the Earth's atmosphere. And it's the longest measurement that we have from an observatory in Hawaii from 1958 till present day. So at present day, we've got 414 parts per million. And that has been a steady increase since 1958, since this long-term data set began. It's a steady increase. I was born in the year where we had 332 parts per million. So from that, you can work out what I do. So biosequestration, the plant is absorbing carbon dioxide, as I said, keeping the carbon and emitting the O2. And the marine environment is quite a good place to see that. All plants all over the world are constantly doing this, but because they're emitting carbon or they're respiring into the air, it's hard for us to see. So this was a video that we took on seagrass bed, actually in Southeast Asia. Fortunate enough to go to Timor-Leste a couple of years ago, and you can see that these plants are respiring and they're expelling O2. So back to our Keeling curve, whilst we see a gentle or a steady increase, which is this blue line, you can see this red line shows oscillations, and that's the seasonal variation of atmospheric carbon dioxide. And that's because the northern hemisphere, when in growth state or is photosynthesizing, it absorbs more carbon, and then when it is respiring and there's less growth or a huge amount of vegetative decay through the autumn, then we see more respiration. Well, respiration takes place year round from plants, but with the explosion in photosynthesis early on in the year and through the summer, then there's a slight lag in that. So it's carbon's biosequestration is a reasonably big deal. And when we think about biosequestration, we think about our terrestrial habitats. We think about forests and how they sort of flux and store carbon over the course of the year. The issue with terrestrial habitats is that trees, they have a certain lifespan, they fall over, they decay, and that carbon stored within the tree is then put back into the carbon cycle. And of course, there's a danger that these habitats catch fire. So blue carbon is carbon that is sequestered and stored in the ocean. So all living things in the ocean store carbon within the carbon cycle. But the three habitats that do the biggest heavy lifting of this type of biosequestration are salt marshes, mangroves, and seagrasses. And with the absence of air and the absence of fire, these habitats sequester carbon into the sediments, and it's very hard harder for this carbon to be re-released and remineralized back into the atmosphere. So there was a study in 2011 that compared terrestrial habitats to our blue carbon or our coastal vegetative habitats, and the rate of sequestration per year per gram per meter squared. And you can see on the left-hand side, we've got tropical forests, boreal forests, and temperate forests. And on the right-hand side, we have our coastal vegetative habitats. that are storing the carbon that they capture within with the sediments. It's considerably quicker to sequester this type of carbon in the marine or coastal habitat. So we started our seagrass work, and it was predominantly about endangered species and faunal assemblages and fisheries. But there isn't a week that goes past that we don't now have a telephone call about, or a request about how carbon could be offset or mitigated against using blue carbon and seagrasses. So there's a clear reason that the UK is collectively or nationally getting interested in seagrasses. It appears to be, or from recent academic studies, seems to be a huge decline in these habitats. But not only do they have the ability to store carbon very effectively, they have also other associated benefits to the habitat. So fisheries support coastal protection and nutrient cycling. So seagrasses and other coastal habitats will store nitrogen in just an effective way. I think the paper in 2009 valued seagrasses as one of the third most valuable habitat on the planet, and that really only took into account nutrient cycling, not fisheries support, not coastal protection, or even carbon. So let's go on. At the OCT, we are working on some of the educational aspects of remedies and also trialling restoration techniques. And we have an aim to restore 8 hectares of seagrass over the course of the project. And there are 4 hectares within Plymouth Sound, SAC, and 4 hectares in the Solent Maritime. So in 2020, we collected 820,000 seeds. That was done by hand, and Fiona's previous presentation showed us collecting those. We pick the reproductive shoot, we bring them back to the lab space, we allow them to rot down and release the seed from the spathe. We then try and hold them dormant over the course of the winter, or to deploy at a suitable point where we feel that we're going to give the seeds the best chance. So over the course of the next 6 weeks, we will construct or create 27,000 planting units from these seeds. And a planting unit is really a natural Hessian bag, a jute bag that we had responsibly sourced and ethically sourced from overseas. And the intention is for a small amount of compost and agricultural sand that is that's been sterilised so it doesn't carry infection, to put 30 seeds in each bag and then deploy these over a 1 to ½ metre sort of planting interval. So we've got 2 approaches: seed bombs. So each one of these bags will be bagged up by volunteers and then deployed the next day. Or alternatively, to try and give these plants a best chance, we'll try and germinate them within the lab, give them lots of nutrients, so phosphates and nitrates, try and kickstart that germination process, or that seedling growth. The seeds within an embryo, sort of like a packed lunch, if you like. It will germinate. It's going to use up all of the food that it's got within that packed lunch, and the idea is that we'll supplement it, so we're promoting or giving them a good chance at growing. The intention is to complete the work in Plymouth Sound by the 2nd quarter in 2022, and you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there we have a chart that might be familiar to you, or map that might be familiar to some of you, and that is in Jennycliff Bay. We've requested within our licence that we set up a voluntary no anchor zone, and we hope that the boating community will be on board with us. Having grown up in Plymouth myself, I learned to swim in Plymouth Sound, I learned to surf in Plymouth Sound, I learned to sail in Plymouth Sound, and finally I learned to dive in Plymouth Sound. Sort of familiar that there is a little bit of anchoring activity to the northeast of that chart or map, whichever you'd like to call it. But hopefully we will establish a voluntary no anchor zone, and that will be followed. So we've also got to repeat this process in the Solent, and all of our plants will be cultured from seed. So just to drill down into that chart that we had, the grey area here is the outputs of a habitat suitability model from Exeter that was commissioned by Natural England, Exeter University. So that's where the model thinks that we might be able to grow our seagrasses. The yellow area is where we have requested our licence for, and obviously there's an area to the north that is populated by 4 long rectangles, and each one of those rectangles is 1 hectare in size, so 10,000 square meters. So we have our habitat suitability, we have our license area. The green dots around our license area are where our voluntary no anchor zone markers will be installed. The QHM has agreed to put out a notice to mariners that this area should be avoided. And finally, our purple spot there, or our cerise, is where we currently find seagrass. Now, there might be areas of seagrass along that stretch of coast, so we're performing a recce on Monday, some reconnaissance, and we've got a number of divers going in just to make sure that we're not populating areas where seagrass is already growing, because that would defeat the object. Finally, just some pictures of the Seagrass Lab. So we've planted up our units. We have to the top left and centre pictures there are they're 13 by 14 centimetre natural Hessian bags. They decay reasonably quickly. On the bottom left there is one of our young seedlings, and you can see that it's already got quite a bit of green leaf. So obviously we are trying to give the plants as much nitrogen as we can to develop that, and then phosphate for root development. And finally, we've got a picture on the right hand side, which is a number of our little seedlings that are growing away. And these are the type of plants that we intend to deploy in Plymouth Sound as part of remedies on the latter stages of our deployment over the next 6 weeks. I think that's it. Thanks for listening. Obviously, if anybody wants to contact me, they've got my email address there, and our partners down at the bottom, and we appreciate the support of the South Devon AONB.
Thank you very much, Mark. Right, we've got a few questions. One from Jules asking if, where's the actual question gone? Sorry. Jules, it might be quicker and easy if you ask a question, please.
Oh, it was a very little question, other than to say, can you see me? Is this coming off
yes.
okay?
Yeah.
Thanks, Nigel. It's a really exciting project. I actually really liked your GIF on the first slide about global temperatures and the challenge we face. And I was just reaching out and saying, but I'm now looking at a slide with your email address, so I can follow up that question really, because I'm quite interested in where it comes from.
Great, thank you. Okay. Question now, please, from Becky Spencer. Do you want to unmute yourself, Becky?
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button there for a second. So Maddie and I are doing our masters on dwarf seagrass, and they seem to be a bit data deficient. Was wondering if you knew if there's many or any research done on dwarf seagrasses and blue carbon.
I'm not familiar with any. In fact, there's very little done on blue carbon within the UK. We've got a reasonable idea of carbon stocks within the seagrass beds within the beds within Plymouth Sound, because they were measured, but I'm not aware of any within intertidal seagrasses. Perhaps that would be a good project. They're reasonably easy to core, but then it's the carbon analysis work, isn't it? So
yeah, no, that's brilliant. That means I've looked, fair enough, and I'm not missing anything major. And also, you positive that now that we've hooked onto blue carbon, that there might be some change in policy, because you can link it very clearly to the economic value.
Yeah, so I think when you think about all of the other ecosystem, or all of the ecosystem services that seagrasses offer, really at £20, I should really know the price of carbon on a carbon trading scheme, but at $20 a tonne, regeneration of seagrasses becomes almost incomparable because it is so expensive. But when you take into account the value of fisheries support, nitrogen, carbon sequestration, really, nitrogen stripping, carbon is really the sort of cherry on the cake. But it's the only conversation that many people want to have at the moment because of mitigating their offsets, or mitigating their impacts. But we've still got a long way to go before there is a carbon trading scheme for blue carbon. But I know that there's a huge amount of interest in it from several government agencies.
Thank you.
Okay, question now from Shannon Selby.
Shannon, are you there?
Look at the rest of the chat.
Yes,
Shannon's mic isn't working.
Right. Shannon says, I am planning my third year dissertation around Zostera marina and Zostera knowltii, seeing how and if knowltii can hold as much, if not more, blue carbon than marina in the Salcombe estuary. Would love to know if you have pointers on this.
So we worked with a PhD student several years ago to core all of the beds within a previous Heritage Lottery funded project. With regards to coring a 30 centimetre core diving in the Salcombe estuary, the sediment, or there's a lot of shell fragment on the surface of the seagrass, so it wasn't possible to core it. If you could do that at lowest astronomical tide, and I think Nigel would be probably more of an expert on the exposure of subtidal seagrasses over lowest astronomical tide, which might allow you to core, and then the intertidal coring would be obviously considerably easier, and then you can compare the two of them.
Actually, if I can pick up on a little bit, Shannon, we actually have a couple of MSc students interested in doing something slightly similar. And I think if there's any coring to be done, it might be a case of trying to share the data from that, because the estuary is a SSSI, and we would need to get assent from Natural England for that. But please contact me after the talk, and I'll get back to you on that. Thank you. Dave Kerno, do you want to ask your questions, please?
Yeah, I've always been a little puzzled with biosequestration with seagrass, because I don't see the areas of seagrass getting shallower. And if there's a lot of carbon going into the sediment, then surely the sediment must be getting bigger, and the sea and the depth of the water then getting shallower. Because on land, if you had, you know, massive trees falling down, if they didn't rot away, that would build up the soil levels quite substantially. But that doesn't seem to be happening on the seabed.
Correct. So that's why that's when our trees fall down on land, the majority of that carbon is remineralized back into CO2 into the atmosphere. The advantage about blue carbon is that it's compressed within the sediment. So when you dig down into that, there is an anoxic level at about 6 to 8 centimeters, and that is compressed under the seabed, and the seagrass is keeping that as a cap. So not dissimilar to when a field is ploughed, tilled over, ready for replanting. There is an enormous amount of carbon dioxide emitted within that, and that's sort of pretty well covered within the IPCC carbon inventory. So the advantage about seagrass is and coastal vegetative habitats is they don't frequently get disturbed. So what it does is it compresses it.
Okay.
We have a question from Peter Brown, please, and then we'll go to the next speaker.
Myself, am I? Yeah. Off.
Yeah.
Good. Mark, you and I did a study once in the estuary with a camera trying to plot out the seagrass areas, and I remember there was I did ask you at that time about seeding out, and I think maybe it was too early for your project, your seeding project, to you weren't sure at that stage. What I was wondering was, up at Kitley, which is fairly high up the estuary, there's no seagrass there at all that we could find, and I don't think either of us knew whether the salinity was too low for the seagrass to grow. I was wondering whether any data had come to see whether, in fact, your seeding could be done up there or not.
Well, as I seem to remember from our day on the boat, which was great fun, and sort of, I guess, local knowledge, Kitley dries out, doesn't it?
Well, no, Kitley doesn't. There are deep water moorings there, in fact.
Right.
I'm talking about the estuary widens out just after the harbour master, harbour authority area ends, and then it goes up to very wide and shallow, well, wide and deep, and then becomes shallow up by Steer Point.
I couldn't comment on the salinity because there isn't a the thing is, estuaries have complex interactions with water. So as the tide comes in, then the salinity is different as the tide goes out. And we have a project we're looking to run on the Dart estuary, actually, and the salinity seems okay there. It seems that low salinity is conducive to seed germination, but when you get to salinities below for subtidal, 24, 25 parts per thousand, then it messes with the metabolism of the plant. On the Tamar, we have recently seen huge growth within the intertidal seagrass around St. John's Lake area. So I think it's a complex mix between geochemistry and water chemistry. So without knowing more about that, it's hard to comment, but it might be suitable for intertidal restoration, which would be good.
Yeah, so that would be using a slightly different species of seagrass than
Yes,
say you're using at Jennycliff.
yes. So as one of the previous questions asked, it was about dwarf eelgrass or intertidal sea. So we have two in the UK. One is tolerant to quite big sort of changes in environmental temperatures, and because obviously when the tide goes out, the plant's exposed to huge temperature fluctuations.
But these are all native species. They're not Pacific or somewhere from.
No, we've tried to collect the seed from the closest area. So the seed that we collected was from Looe and from Falmouth. So we wouldn't want to take a genotype of plant from, for an example, Lindisfern and try to put it into the southwest, because it is more than likely has some sort of genetic adaptation to survive in those different circumstances.
Sure. As with wildflower meadows on land.
Yeah, you try to take the seed from as close a place as you would replant.
Peter, maybe if I can butt in a bit there. There's two sort of species of the dwarf seagrass. One is this Noltii that's been mentioned, really quite a tiny one, but the other one is actually a variant of the common or the Zoster marina species that seems to grow more dwarf in the more intertidal conditions further up estuaries. But that's something we're looking to. We got permission to do some transplanting of those within the Salk and Kingsbridge estuary, hopefully this year. And from the learning from that, who knows, we might be able to explore that in other estuaries in the future. But we've got several hoops we need to jump through beforehand.
Fiona lost 0, I've lost 4.
Got a better job than I have. No, just to be fair, there were a number of people that were very interested in something coming from the Queen's Harbour Master at 7 o'clock. So don't anybody feel insulted at all. I was warned about that. Right. Sorry, I did miss that Gillian Glegg was going to ask a question. This will be, then we'll hand over to Liz for her talk.
It's just a quick question. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark and Fiona, both really interesting talks and a really interesting project. And I was just wondering particularly about the replanting in Jennycliff. I was just thinking about the stability of the sandbags in storms and things like that. Is that something that is, or is it just sort of, because that could be a bit of a problem. And I was also thinking that we do sometimes go out with cameras and we're always looking for things to look at when we've got remotely operated things wandering about. Is that something we could go and look at? Are they there yet?
So we intended to start planting on the 4th of March, but just through COVID restrictions, it's gone on a little bit longer than anticipated. So you can't look at them now, but you'll be able to look at them in May. What was the first question? So the first question was
stability.
Stability. Yes, I think you're right that. Well, our first intention was we'd recruited 50 diver buddy pairs from BZAC, so over 100 divers to help us pin these in, and just through a sort of delay and then a change in we can't ask BZAC clubs to do things that are contrary to national guidelines with regards to COVID-19. So this year we will deploy the bags. We've explored the idea of tying them together. We explored pinning them in. All of these things through basically through. I don't want to use the excuse of COVID, but COVID has had a pretty bad effect on it. So if a storm comes in to the eastern entrance of the Sound, then we do run a risk of losing them. I don't think we run a risk of losing them within the currents. I think if anything, they'll get buried. So it's slightly later in the season. We did run a couple of really simple experiments at Jenny Cliff on lowest astronomical tide. We deployed some of our planting units and a huge swell came through about a week later. It was huge. It's the biggest one that I remember on the south coast since, I think, well, yeah, for a very long time. We went back and on the next low tide or spring low, and some of them had moved. The ones that we pinned in with pegs had moved, or wooden pegs, because presumably it sort of worked free and they were buoyant. But we used a really simple sort of U-shaped staple, iron staple, and they remained where they were. And at some points they would have been in the surf zone of maybe a metre of swell, I don't know, huge swell. So we're confident that we're reasonably confident.
You're doing the best you can.
Yes,
that's all we can do, especially in the times of COVID. Sounds good. And we might go out and have a look for them if we can see them in May.
Certainly keep the Latin long, and we'd appreciate.
Oh, it'd be better to go and just look for them. Yeah, no, I might get in touch then. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks.
There's a lovely story of a Scottish laird that wanted to plant his hillside with trees, so he filled a cannon with seeds. Maybe you could get the MOD to help you with that, Mark. Right. Lastly then, sorry, what we've been building up to, our third speaker is Liz Cole of the Plymouth City Council. Your challenge, Liz, is not to lose anybody else, just pulling your leg, sorry. Talking about the Remedies project within the Yealm Estuary community, working with and for the local community. Again, I'm going to ask Liz to introduce herself, and thank you, Liz, and over to you. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Yes, it's lovely to be here and to follow on from those two very exciting talks. I think it's going to be a challenge, but however, so my name is Liz. I'm a Natural Infrastructure Officer for Plymouth City Council, where I lead on a number of projects, terrestrial and marine, from outdoor play to plastics to general improvements on the home and the waterfront. But over the last year, I've also taken on the management of the European Marine Site Recreational Impacts Project that the council leads, and I coordinate TechF's role within the Remedies project. So I worked with Fee when she was at the council before she moved to Natural England. And I used to work at the Natural Marine Aquarium, so I used to work with Mark as well when I worked in the schools and community engagement team. So we've all worked with each other for quite a long time, and it's lovely to be part of this project. I have got a presentation and I will attempt to share it. This will work. There we go. Are we on the right one? Can you see just the... Oh, I've lost all sound.
Yes, it looks right to me. It's about the special area of conservation.
Okay, right. Lovely. I've Nigel, you're mute. Were you saying something important? No. Okay, cool. I usually deal with Teams, I have to say. I don't normally do Zoom, so this is all a bit different for me. Anyway, so yes, I am part 3 of this series, this trilogy of talks. Fee's given us a great overview of the project in general, and Mark's covered why seagrass is so important and the restoration that we're doing. So without trying to repeat too many of the same things, my job at the end here is to try and bring that down to a local level and to think about what we're doing in Plymouth Sound and Tamar estuaries, and how people can find out more and what they can do to get involved. So mine's going to be relatively short, and then we can open back up to questions at the end. So this is the area that we're focusing on for our section of the Remedies project. It is the Plymouth Sound and Tamar Estuaries Special Area of Conservation. And there's two key areas really that we've been focusing on so far locally. And that's to the left, we've got Corsan Bay. And then to the right, we've got the Yealm Estuary. And what I'm going to try and just give a quick overview of is what we've been doing so far in the first year of the project, and then what we're going to look forward to as the project progresses. I'm going to stick to trying to keep it to the same objectives that Fee was using, just to keep it kind of simple, so we can try and focus on those and see where we've got to. So on to the first objective, we've been looking at understanding behaviour and trying to work out how we can balance recreational use of the marine environment, find out how different users go out there and enjoy their local waters, what they do, who they are, how they're using it, when they're using it, and then work together to increase our knowledge and create positive changes in behaviour and usage. So that's what this kind of section is all about. And one of the ways we've done that, and we did touch on this earlier, is to commission some consultants, Collingwood Environmental Planning, to explore practices of recreational boaters, and they focus particularly on Plymouth and Solent in the Isle of Wight. So they've been doing their work for the last few months, and their report is hoping to be coming out in the next few weeks. And it will be a public report, and it will be available, and it will be published on the Natural England Evidence Catalogue, as well as available through other networks and sharing streams. So they've done lots of work, and hopefully we managed to spread the word far and wide while they were doing that work, so people could fill in the questionnaire and make their views known. But until that report comes out, I'm afraid I can't really go into any detail of what they've actually found, but what they want to do is to be able to help us look at what we're doing and then influence our projects and our plans to make sure that we take into account voters' opinions. What we have done more locally is to carry out two very small scale volunteer-led boat movement surveys. One of these was in Corsan Bay and one was at Sellers Cove. And what they were a bit like a citizen science thing, but they were very much a snapshot of activity in a certain amount of time. So what we asked people to do, we asked for some volunteers, and Nigel helped us with this enormously locally, was to ask for some volunteers who were willing to once a day, or however many times they wanted to, but each day somebody, a volunteer, would go and stand or sit or be in an area and look at what was happening in the bay for 1 hour. That's all it was. So it was to walk up to an area. In Corsan Bay, we asked people to stand by the War Memorial, if anyone knows what that is, looking out. And in Sellers, we had two viewpoints, one from one from the east and one from the west. So people could come from either from Newton Ferries or from Newton Ferries to have a look and see what from Wembury side or the Newton Ferries side. So we had a point and people could watch. And we had a little chart, and we asked them just to take a note of the weather, have a look at the sea, think how warm it was, and just record them on a sheet. And then they were looking at the boats. So really it was just an absolute snapshot of what boats there were when they arrived, how many travelled in that hour, who was anchored or moored if they were in core sand, and to note them down. We did this for a period of 2 months, and each day it was between 2 and 3 in the afternoon in core sand, and then in cellars it was between 12 and 1, and then there was an optional extra of between 6 and 7. So we always did the 12 and 1, and then occasionally people would also be willing to do the 6 and 7, so we just had additional data. For cellars, we had 60 recordings and recorded sets of data, and from that we had 824 vessels recorded over that time. 666 were moving and 199 were anchored at some point. So some boats might have been moving and anchoring, and some might have just been anchored, or some might have just been moving around. So the numbers are sort of don't always tally, but that's the kind of numbers we were looking at. In core sand, we had slightly more, actually. I haven't got those figures with me, but again, it was a really interesting exercise. It was a great way of involving people. We had really keen and diligent volunteers, and we were really grateful to be able to get that going through sort of August, September and October, when we'd had so many difficulties with lockdowns and things, but we did manage to squeeze it in that time. But what I would say, and I think Fee also said this, is that we do appreciate that it wasn't a normal year. So while we've got this information, and the idea is that you do it at the start of the project and then again at the end, we are really aware that it's going to be difficult to do direct comparisons because it wasn't a normal year. But what we might do is try and adapt, or we might try and do one every year rather than just doing one at the beginning and the end. We might try and do more, or just certainly take into account that there are differing factors. But what it is a baseline survey and useful information for us to be able to see the sorts of activities that are going on in those two areas. So the other area we've been working on is the AMS and the restoration sites. So Mark's already given us a fantastic overview of what's happening with the restoration, and it's great to think that the first restoration site is happening in our patch. It's within Plymouth Sound. It's an exciting project, and we're really keen to see how that's going to move forward and to pan out. The other area we've been working on locally, managing to get some progress on, is with the advanced mooring systems in Core Sand Bay. So we've been working very closely with the Parish Council and with the Rain Gig Club and quite a few of the private mooring owners in Core Sand. And we've managed to get some progress on potentially replacing the 6 swim markers that go out regularly into the bay, and to replace those with an advanced mooring system, which will then allow the boys to stay out all year round, which is great really, because there's been a huge increase in the number of wild swimmers, and to have the boys out all year would be a huge advantage. So we're looking at replacing those 6 swim markers. We've got 5 AMS already being trialled in the bay that Mark set up, and then we've got 4 new mooring owners who've come forward who would also like to trial an advanced mooring system. 2 of which are keen to try a system called Sterling, and 2 of which are keen to try a system called Seaflex. So Sterling is a system whereby the chain's lifted off the seabed using a series of floats, and Seaflex is a bungee system. But in effect, both of them work with a helical screw, which goes into the seabed. Then there's a riser, and then there's the marker buoy at the top. So it's been a great experience to work so far over in Core Sand. They're keen and they're interested. there's been a lot of positive messaging, and we're hoping to bring on more and more people as they get to know more about it, and to understand more about how it works. At the moment, anyone who takes up an AMS through Remedies and through the trial, they sign a legal agreement with Natural England for the use of the equipment until the end of the programme. And at the end of that, it's then up to them whether they want to take it on. If they do, it then becomes their mooring and their responsibility. If they decide they don't want to, then we would have the responsibility for taking it out, and they can go back to whatever system that they want to use. But I think it's been great so far, and I think Mark's planning to go over with some volunteers in April to do some filming and some surveys to try and spread the news and to get some more input and ideas from those who are keen to get involved. The third area that we've been looking at and doing some work locally on is the education and communications package. There's lots going on here, and it's one of the ones where we've had to try the hardest to try and overcome some of the issues with COVID and with lockdown and with not being able to get out and see people. And it's a real shame for the whole project so far that we've had to curtail some of the community involvement, the face-to-face stuff and the engagement activities that we had planned. But despite that, we've managed to do a huge amount of stuff within this. So there's been a schools programme running the whole time, which obviously set out to be face-to-face, but has been successfully converted to online lessons with Super Seagrass, run through the OCT and the NMA. By September, they're hoping to get back to face-to-face activity, which will be great. But for local schools, it's a fantastic opportunity to get into the aquarium, to come and see what's happening, to see the lab that Mark showed us pictures of, and to really get involved. So would encourage anybody who's got school links or knows teachers or has kids who would like to know more about seagrass to get involved with our schools programme. There are some volunteering opportunities that people can come and get involved with. I think there's always there's the surveys and the monitoring activities that we're trying to do. There's quite a lot of volunteer opportunities for restoration work as well. And I've got some links and some emails that I can add to the chat later of if people want to get involved with volunteering with the restoration. A lady called Emma Nolan, who works with Mark. She's looking for people who can work with her. There's been a number of online webinars locally as well, again led by OCT, which are called Secrets of the Seabed. They've had 2 already, and they're on the I think they're on the NMA YouTube site. I think it is. They've had one on generally on seagrasses, and they've had one on special areas of conservation. But on March the 25th, there's actually another one, a third one in the series, which is all about advanced mooring systems. So if you wanted to find out more about them, how they work, what they're like, what the different types are, you can sign up to that webinar and get involved. Like all of these things, it's free and easy to do, and I can put the link in to the chat when I've finished talking. But that's the 25th of March, so that's next week. And then there's the website again, which Fee mentioned, and just the local context to this is that there'll be loads of pages in there. There'll be pages, contacts, links, networks for each of the areas, and we'll be able to have as much as we want with a focus on Plymouth Sound and Tamar Estuaries. So as that website gets built and developed, then we'll have pages and storyboards within that can link back to our local area. So just sort of to come to an end, really. I mean, I think that's what we've managed to get done. I mean, we keep talking about COVID, and we try not to use it as an excuse, but obviously it has prevented us doing quite a lot of the community engagement work, which is what we really wanted to do and what we're very keen to try and bring back in as soon as we can. So as we move forward, we're going to continue to plan to install the AMS in key sites and where people are keen to get involved. We're going to continue with monitoring and with the seeding of the restoration site and phase 2 as that goes forward. And the bit I'm really excited about and happy to move forward is to increase our contact with people, with those communities, with getting out and talking to people, seeing what they're doing. We want to be able to find out how people are using the waters and how it might affect the seagrass. So building up voluntary code of conduct, looking at how we can work together to make sure that we all protect what we've got out there. We can do that through workshops, we can do that through talks, we can do that at events. There's the big Sail GP event that's coming to Plymouth in July. They're very, very keen on the Seagrass project and in promoting the project and what we're doing. And local people can come down. There's going to be the race village. There's going to be lots and lots going on. So those kind of activities are going to be great to be able to promote once we can get back out and about. The schools programme is hopefully going to go from strength to strength, more and more kids, local kids, finding more about what we're doing. And then another area which we haven't really touched on yet, but which we're keen to start doing is to bring in the dive programme and to start removing some of the abandoned mooring equipment and scrap metal that's left on the seabed. So there's lots of exciting activities coming up. There's lots more to happen. We're year 1 into 3 years of a project, so there's lots to develop on, lots to build on, lots of ways local people can get involved and find out more. And as we move forward, we're really excited to bring on as many people and get them involved as we can. So I think that is a whistle-stop tour, and is more or less all I needed to say. I think it was just bringing up the rear, just sort of saying that yes, these exciting, amazing things are happening, but also, you know, locally there's lots that we can get involved with too. So I'll leave it there, and then we can go back to questions. Hopefully Mark is still around, and we'll be able to answer any other questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Liz. That's great. There are no questions that I noticed on the chat. Sorry, there's been a bit of to and fro with people. Are there any questions? Peter Brown, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, please.
Right. Yes, thank you very much. I actually took part in the monitoring at Sellers on the North Mayo side of the estuary. One thing that with community engagement that could be perhaps improved is making sure that the yacht clubs that are in the vicinity are fully appraised of what's happening, because I saw a letter and had several uninformed comments about the research that were really very anti, and making the assumption that it was anti-boaters. And I tried to counteract this, but of course, as a volunteer, I wasn't the best person to be able to convince people. So I don't know if what publicity you did give to the yacht clubs, but it's not just the harbour master that needs to be informed. It's the yacht clubs and therefore the boaters that need to be informed. And I know you can repeat something time and time again and still people get it wrong, but anyway, it's just an observation I made during the remedies project. Yeah,
I think that's a really, really good point. And I think it's something obviously that we can take on and learn from. I think there perhaps wasn't enough. I think it's fair to say there wasn't enough communication, and perhaps there's others that we should have told. It's something we can learn from. It's the first time we've done it. It was slightly squeezed in, trying to get something done at the end of the season because we'd had delays, and there's lots of excuses I could sort of, potentially try and say, but I don't think that that's necessary. I think what you've said is very true, and going forward, I think as hopefully as we do more and more general engagement and work with different groups and different stakeholders, we'll make sure that we don't make that mistake again, and we bring everybody in and try and make sure that those who need to know, and that the right messaging gets across at the right time to the right people. And that is one of the big key points of the project, really, to try and get that right.
Thanks, Liz.
Mark, yours a question, or are you going to?
No, I was just going to ask Peter a question. Which yacht club did you receive those queries from?
Well, my local yacht club, which is Yealm.
I remember giving a presentation there several years ago, and the wonderful scallop and black pudding dinner that you provided for me that evening still sticks in my mind. So if you'd like one of the remedies team to come back and give a presentation, then once we're out of these ghastly COVID times, and it sounds like possibly over the next few months we would, but more than happy to.
Yeah, well, that's great, Mark. I would be very glad to arrange for another talk from you at the Yacht Club. Your last one was very well attended, so
it looks like the project manager's actually stepping up to offer them on.
Yeah. Well, there's dinner involved.
So I'll drop my hand.
Thank you. Joe, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi. My main question was, I was really interested in the quality of the beds at the mouth of the Yealm and the ones off of cellars. Like Liz was saying, even just during the survey period, you had 199 anchors being dropped in that area. What sort of condition do you know whether that bed is in, and it's still there obviously, but is it in any good condition at all, and would it be better to try and protect the areas which are already there rather than replanting elsewhere, sort of thing?
I just so the areas around Plymouth Sound, so Natural England do their condition assessment, and that was done a few years ago. It's an expensive mission with divers to do those even annually, so we haven't gone back to those areas, but it's something again, so we've got sort of sea search involved. We can organise them to go and look at those areas, certainly on my doorstep, but we will be visiting it at the end of the project, so that's start and end, so we will be looking, but it's quite hard to do that continual monitoring just because of the costs. But if Gillian wants to head out there with their students with a camera, she can always do that. And if people are out there diving, they can report that. But we will sort of know that over time, I think. I think Mark might have something to add.
Just having been part of the Natural England assessment team the last time that they were studied, as anecdotal, or I think it's backed up by Natural England's data, and maybe Ruth can step in here. I think a lot of the beds within Plymouth Sound are failing their assessment, but the areas off cellars, there is a large volume of anchoring, but it's really reasonably close to the beach. But when you get out into the channel, which is obviously a navigational channel, it's it's very dense, it's very long, it's very, interestingly, you don't see reproductive shoots in it, but it's also within the harbour limits, so anything north of the bar requires a permission from the harbour office to dive. But I think from the last condition assessment, it was reasonably healthy. It's just the anchoring activity in cellars, but what impact that's had, whether there's an area of disturbance and then areas that have been, for logistical reasons within the navigational channel, undisturbed, then
I think ideally we would like to go back more than we can, and hopefully Sea Search can get out there. It's probably a bit tricky actually with the tide. It'd be quite interesting because, sorry, Joe, you can...
Sorry, and yeah, just because it's so busy with boats and there's so much traffic, and I don't really know, I've lived nearby in the village for ages, and I don't know of many people that have ever dived that stretch. And the seagrass is there. You can see it on spring lows. You can see it at the edge of the rocks, but it's whether the extent of the bed and how far it goes and what condition it is in that area is interesting.
Yeah, I had a plan to go and snorkel the bed in the last big tides, but then the landslips happened.
Yeah.
So you can't get the access, and I think depending on how long that access is restricted, that might be something to consider over the summer period, because will more people be accessing cellars from the water, and potential, you know, if there's people just in little dinghies with props and stuff, will that have an increased impact on the seagrass there? I don't know if people living in Newton Ferrers or North Mayo, have you heard any news about the access? Because I was hoping to go back for these next big tides on the 30th, but yes, Peter, please.
Well, the access from the North Mayo side down to Cellars, that path is closed at the moment because it's a landslip.
Yeah, that's what I was told, and I showed the pictures, but I was just wondering if apparently it's closed.
If you wanted to do more monitoring, I'm not quite sure where we would go, but that was certainly, that path was the best view across the estuary at that point.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's a problem. There's been quite a few landslips along the coast path during this winter.
Yeah, it scuppered my plans.
Do we know if it's National Trust land? Sorry.
Yeah, it's National Trust.
Yeah, it's on the National Trust website, actually. I was looking that it said there's been a landslip and they're waiting for an inspection from Devon County Council, I think. But if it's anything like Jennycliff, well, that's been closed for I don't know how long. So I suppose, and it depends on priorities. And it is such a narrow bit where it's gone. But I'm not sure how they will be able to reinforce it. It's probably a big old engineering job.
Is it part of the coastal footpath? I presume not, because it's just access down to the beach.
Yeah, it's just the little path down, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a path that comes off the coastal path. It's a little side arm that goes down to the beach. I presume it's national. It's owned by National Trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so.
But with that, thank you so much to our three speakers.